Welcome to the Book Voices channel. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with our latest book discussions. Now let's dive into today's book.
Okay, so two-thirds, right, two-thirds of adults, and we're talking developed countries here, aren't getting enough sleep. Like, nowhere near enough.
Yeah. It's a pretty stunning stat when you think about it.
Yeah.
And it really begs the question, is anyone actually waking up feeling refreshed these days? Like genuinely refreshed?
That's a good point. Without an alarm jarring you awake, it makes you wonder how much we've just accepted being tired as the norm.
Well, that's what we're going to really dig into today. Why sleep matters so much. And we're talking the real nitty-gritty based on some pretty fascinating research, especially this book, Why We Sleep. We'll be pulling from a bunch of other sources too, of course.
Right, and we're not just talking about, what happens when we're out like a light. We're going to explore why we need to sleep in the first place, evolutionarily, what's the point? And of course, we'll get into what happens when we don't get enough, which, as you pointed out, seems to be the case for, most people.
Yeah, and this isn't about adding to anyone's to-do list or making anyone feel guilty. It's more about hopefully giving you some real insights, maybe even some whoa moments, cutting through all the noise and jargon out there, so you can really understand what's going on with sleep.
Totally. Our mission today is pretty simple: to figure out why sleep is so crucial for our health and how all of this amazing science actually applies to our lives.
Absolutely. And a lot of what we'll talk about might challenge some of the common assumptions folks have about sleep.
For sure. So let's jump right in. One of the things that jumped out from all this research, it's pretty stark, right? We are in a sleep deprivation crisis.
Yeah, it's pervasive. And like we said, it's not just about feeling a little groggy in the morning. There are some serious knock-on effects for our health.
Seriously, if you're consistently sleeping less than 6 or 7 hours a night, you're basically crippling your body's defenses. Your immune system takes a major hit. Your risk of cancer more than doubles.
Yeah. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Did you know that insufficient sleep is actually considered a major factor in whether or not someone develops Alzheimer's disease later in life?
That's scary stuff. And it gets even worse. Even if you're just skimping on sleep for a week, cutting back moderately, your blood sugar levels can get messed up enough to put you in the pre-diabetic range.
Right. And on the physical side, insufficient sleep also increases your risk of heart problems. Things like blocked arteries, heart attacks, even congestive heart failure.
It's wild to think about how much our sleep habits are tied to the health of our hearts.
Absolutely. And we can't forget the impact on mental health. There are strong links between sleep problems and all the major psychiatric conditions: depression, anxiety, even suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, that's a huge concern. And let's not forget the very real danger of drowsy driving. We're talking hundreds of thousands of accidents and even deaths every year.
Yeah, and to put that in perspective, one person dies every hour in the U.S. from a fatigue-related car accident.
That's a sobering statistic. And think about this: drowsy driving is responsible for even more accidents than alcohol and drugs combined.
So, with all that in mind, it seems like a good time to ask the fundamental question: why do we sleep at all? Because from an evolutionary standpoint, it seems kind of crazy, Razy.
You're super vulnerable when you're asleep. You can't find food, protect yourself, or really do much of anything.
Exactly. You're basically a sitting duck for predators. And it's not like we've always known the answer. It's only in recent years that we've started to understand why sleep is so crucial.
Right. And the research paints a fascinating picture. Sleep, as it turns out, is the best thing we can do to reset our brains and bodies every day. It's like the ultimate recharge.
Exactly. And this idea that sleep is essential for fighting off basically the deterioration that comes with life is something that's only recently come to light.
And what's concerning is that even though we're now realizing how crucial sleep is, we haven't really made it a priority in our overall health conversations. We talk about diet and exercise, but sleep often gets left out.
That's a good point. And that's where shows like this come in, right? To try to bridge that gap.
Totally. So let's talk about the how. How does sleep actually work? And a big part of that is understanding our circadian rhythm, our internal clock, right?
Yeah, this is basically a 24-hour cycle that syncs up our bodies with the natural day and night. It tells us when to be awake and when to be asleep, but it also controls things like hormone release, body temperature, even digestion.
It's amazing, right? This internal sense of time isn't just a human thing. It goes all the way back to plants. Did you know that?
Oh, yeah. Way back in 1729, a scientist named Jean-Jacques Dortu de Meuron was studying these plants called Mimosa pudica. They're known as sleeping leaves because their leaves droop down at night and open back up during the day.
Right. So he noticed that they kept doing this even when he kept them in the dark. Like they still knew when it was day and night, even without sunlight.
Exactly. That was like the first proof that living organisms have their own internal clocks.
And for us humans, daylight is the most important cue for resetting that clock.
Right. Our bodies have evolved to sync up with the sun. But here's the thing. Our modern society often doesn't make this easy. We've got work schedules that tend to favor morning people, the larks.
Yeah, which can be tough for the night owls whose bodies naturally want to go to bed and wake up later.
Absolutely. They're constantly fighting their own biology, and this can actually lead to chronic sleep deprivation and a whole host of health problems.
It's almost like we're forcing them into a time zone that doesn't match their internal clocks. So we've got the circadian rhythm, or process C, which is like our internal timekeeper. What's the other major factor that determines when we sleep?
Sleep pressure. It's also called process S, and it's basically driven by this chemical called adenosine that builds up in our brains the longer we're awake.
Ah, adenosine. That's the stuff that caffeine blocks, right?
Yeah.
So the more adenosine, the more we feel that pressure to sleep.
Exactly. And these two processes, process C and process S, they kind of work together like a seesaw.
So in the morning, our circadian rhythm is saying, wake up. And adenosine levels are low, so we feel alert.
Right. But as the day goes on, we get more and more adenosine buildup, that sleep pressure. And then in the evening, our circadian rhythm starts to wind down, and that's when sleep pressure takes over.
Makes sense. And I've heard that if you're feeling sleepy mid-morning, it could be a sign you're not getting enough sleep.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. It could mean you're still carrying a sleep debt from the night before. And during sleep, your brain actually clears out that adenosine, so you wake up feeling refreshed.
So we've got the why and the how of sleep. Now, what actually happens when we're asleep? The research talks about different sleep stages like NREM and REM.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So NREM, that's non-rapid eye movement sleep. It's got a few different stages, but the deepest one is called slow wave sleep.
And during this stage, our brain waves slow way down. It's like everything becomes super synchronized.
Yeah, it's almost like a bunch of people chanting in unison. And what happens is this part of the brain called the thalamus, which is like a sensory gate, it blocks signals from the outside world.
So we're not really aware of what's going on around us, and we usually don't dream during this stage.
But here's the thing. This isn't just a passive off state. It's actually a very active and organized state where the brain is doing a lot of important restorative work.
Interesting. And then we've got REM sleep, the dreaming stage.
Yeah, and this one's a bit of a paradox. Because even though our bodies are basically paralyzed, our brains are super active.
So we're out cold, but our brains are going wild.
Pretty much. And some parts of the brain are even more active during REM sleep than when we're awake.
That's crazy. Now, what about sleep in other animals? Do they have these same stages?
Well, sleep is actually super diverse across the animal kingdom. Some animals sleep for a few hours, others sleep for most of the day. It depends on things like their diet, their environment, and their brain size.
Right. And then there are the weird ones like dolphins and whales who can sleep with only half of their brain at a time.
Yeah, that's unihemispheric sleep. It allows them to keep breathing and watching out for predators. But they only do this during NREM sleep. REM sleep, for some reason, has to involve both sides of the brain.
Maybe that's why it's so important for complex brain functions. The research also talks about how, in extreme cases, like starvation, the need to find food can actually override the need for sleep.
Yeah, but that's only temporary. You can't go without sleep for too long without serious consequences.
And speaking of food, ever get that after lunch slump?
Oh, yeah. That's like an evolutionary hangover. We're programmed to have a little dip in alertness after a meal, maybe a quick nap.
Makes sense. And it makes you wonder about our modern obsession with, like, working through lunch and always being on.
For sure. The research suggests that humans are naturally biphasic sleepers, meaning we're meant to have a longer sleep at night and a shorter nap in the afternoon.
And there's this idea that way back when, people in Europe actually had 2 separate sleep periods during the night, but it seems like that was more of a cultural thing than a biological necessity.
Right. The research supports the idea that biphasic sleep is actually the more natural pattern for humans. And it's still common in some cultures today, the whole siesta thing.
Makes you wonder if we lost something when we moved away from that. Now let's get into the evolution of human sleep. Did you know that sleeping on the ground, like instead of in trees, might have changed our sleep patterns?
Yeah, the research suggests that. Once our ancestors were no longer at risk of falling out of trees, they could sleep more soundly.
And they could actually experience REM sleep without, plummeting to their deaths, which is pretty funny when you think about it.
For sure. So it seems like sleeping on the ground might have led to shorter but more intense sleep, especially REM sleep.
And humans have a lot more REM sleep than other primates. So
Yeah.
what's so important about this stage? Well, it seems like REM sleep is crucial for processing our emotions.
Yeah. The idea is that REM sleep helps to separate the emotional intensity of a memory from the actual memory itself.
So we can learn from experiences without being overwhelmed by the emotions every time we remember them.
Exactly. And without enough REM sleep, we might be stuck with this, like constant anxiety and emotional baggage.
Interesting. The research talks about this researcher, Rosalind Cartwright, who looked at how dream content relates to emotional recovery. And then there's Dr. Murray Raskin, who found that a drug called prazosin could reduce nightmares in people with PTSD.
Yeah. And both of those findings really point to the deep connection between REM sleep and our ability to process emotions in trauma.
Pretty amazing. Now, REM sleep also seems to be important for our social skills, especially our ability to read facial expression.
Right. It's like REM sleep helps to fine-tune our brain's ability to decode those subtle social cues,
And studies have shown that if you're sleep deprived, you're actually worse at reading emotions on people's faces.
which makes sense, right? If you're not getting enough REM sleep, you might be missing those crucial social calibrations.
It's like your social radar is a bit off.
Mm.
Now, onto something I find super interesting, the link between REM sleep and creativity.
Yeah. So while NREM sleep helps us consolidate memories, REM sleep seems to be where we make those creative leaps.
It's like our brains are free to make connections that we wouldn't normally make when we're awake.
Exactly. And there are some famous examples of this, like Dmitri Mendeleev, who came up with the periodic table after a dream, and Mary Shelley, who got the idea for Frankenstein from a dream.
Pretty cool. And there's a researcher named Robert Stickgold who's done a lot of work showing how REM sleep helps us find creative solutions to problems.
Yeah. His research suggests that during REM sleep, our brains are making connections between seemingly unrelated ideas, which is often how those aha moments happen.
And there was a study where people who got REM sleep were way better at solving a virtual reality maze. So we've talked about how sleep affects adults. Now let's get into how it impacts the developing brain, especially in babies and kids.
Yeah. And this is where REM sleep seems to be particularly crucial. During the second and third trimesters of pregnancy, when the baby's brain is growing like crazy, they're actually getting a ton of REM sleep.
The research calls it electrical fertilizer for the brain.
It's a good analogy, right? All those bursts of activity during REM sleep are helping to build those essential connections between brain cells.
And there's evidence from animal studies that if you disrupt REM sleep during this crucial time, it can actually mess up brain development.
Yeah. Those poor little rat pups who had their REM sleep blocked ended up with smaller brains and social problems later on. And the research mentions alcohol as a big REM sleep suppressor, which is definitely something pregnant women need to be aware of.
Absolutely. Now, as kids get older, deep NREM sleep becomes really important for a process called synaptic pruning.
Yeah, basically it's like cleaning up the brain. So when we're young, our brains make a ton of connections, but not all of them are useful.
So during deep sleep, the brain goes in and gets rid of the weaker connections.
Exactly. And this is especially important in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that controls things like planning, decision-making, and impulse control.
Ah, so that's why teenagers sometimes seem impulsive. Their brains are still under construction.
Yeah, that's part of it. And teenagers also have a naturally shifted circadian rhythm. They want to stay up later and sleep later.
But then they have to get up early for school, which creates this chronic sleep deprivation.
Right. It's like expecting an adult to wake up at 3:15 in the morning every day. And this could have big consequences for their mood, their ability to learn, their health.
Definitely not ideal. Now, what about sleep as we get older? Do we still need as much?
You know, there's this myth that older people need less sleep, but that's not really true. They probably still need around 7 to 9 hours, but they often have trouble actually getting that much.
Right, and the research talks about this decline in sleep efficiency as we age.
Yeah. Basically, it means that older folks spend more time in bed awake. They might fall asleep easily, but they wake up more often during the night.
That sounds frustrating. And it seems like the biggest loss is in deep NREM sleep, that slow wave sleep that's so restorative.
Yeah, that's a key change. And while the reasons aren't fully understood, it's a big concern because of how important deep sleep is for memory and overall brain health.
And the research mentions melatonin as a potential treatment for older adults who are having trouble sleeping.
Yeah, prescription-strength melatonin can sometimes help to regulate their circadian rhythm and improve sleep quality. But it's not a magic bullet, and it's important to talk to a doctor before starting any new medications.
So even though our sleep patterns change as we age, the need for enough good quality sleep stays the same. It's essential throughout our lives. Now let's talk about something that affects everyone, the relationship between sleep and memory.
Absolutely, and the research is clear. Sleep is crucial for memory. Both before and after we learn something new.
Okay, so first, sleep before learning. How does a good night's sleep actually prepare our brains to learn?
Well, it basically refreshes the brain's capacity for forming new memories, especially in this part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is like our short-term memory storage.
So it's like hitting the reset button on our brains, making space for new information.
Exactly. And studies have shown that if you're sleep deprived, you're actually less able to learn new things. But a nap can actually reverse that.
It's like trying to fill a glass that's already full. You need to empty it out first, which is what sleep does. Now, what about sleep after learning? How does that help us remember what we've learned?
This is where deep NREM sleep comes in again. It's during those slow waves that our brains move memories from the hippocampus to the cortex for long-term storage.
So it's like moving files from a temporary folder to the hard drive.
Exactly. And there are even some really cool techniques being developed to boost memory during sleep, like sleep stimulation, where they use tiny electrical pulses to enhance memory consolidation.
And targeted memory reactivation, where they use sounds or smells to basically reactivate specific memories during sleep. It's like giving your brain a little nudge to remember those important things.
Yeah. And it seems like sleep spindles, those bursts of brain activity during NREM sleep, might be involved in this process of deciding which memories to keep.
That's fascinating, and it's not just about remembering facts. Sleep also helps us learn physical skills. Like, have you ever noticed that you're better at something after sleeping on it?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of research on that. It seems like sleep helps to automate motor skills, moving them from more conscious to more unconscious control,
So practice makes perfect, but sleep makes it permanent.
basically. Now, let's talk about the not-so-fun stuff.
Yeah.
What happens to our brains when we don't get enough sleep?
Yeah, the consequences can be pretty scary. We've already talked about drowsy driving, but even small amounts of sleep loss can mess with our attention and focus.
Absolutely. And it's not just about pulling an all-nighter. The effects of partial sleep deprivation, like consistently getting only a few hours, they add up over time.
Right, like 4 hours of sleep for 6 nights straight can make you as impaired as if you hadn't slept at all for 24 hours.
Yeah. And the scary thing is people get used to feeling tired all the time. They don't even realize how impaired they are.
It's like their baseline for normal gets completely reset. And remember, drowsy driving is even more dangerous than drunk driving because those microsleeps, they can happen without any warning.
That's a good point. And it's worth mentioning that naps can be really helpful for restoring alertness. There's a reason why they're mandatory for pilots on long flights.
So power naps are a thing. Now, I know some people think they can function just fine on very little sleep.
Yeah, but the research doesn't really support that. Dr. Thomas Roth, a sleep expert, has said that the percentage of people who can truly thrive on less than 7 hours of sleep is basically zero.
So unless you've got some super rare genetic mutation, you probably need more sleep than you think. And speaking of genetics, sleep deprivation can actually mess with our genes and DNA.
Yeah, that's some pretty crazy stuff. Studies have shown that chronic sleep loss can lead to increased DNA damage and changes in gene activity, even affecting those genes that are supposed to protect us from cancer.
So we're talking about a fundamental impact on our biology. And that's not all. Sleep deprivation also makes us more emotionally reactive.
Right. Brain imaging studies show that when sleep-deprived people see negative images, their amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, goes into overdrive.
And at the same time, their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that helps us control our impulses, it becomes less active.
So you're more likely to overreact to things when you're tired. And this is why sleep is so important for mental health.
Because sleep problems are both a symptom of and a contributor to all sorts of mental illnesses.
Exactly. It's a two-way street.
Now, what about the impact of sleep on learning? This is especially relevant for students.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of research showing that sleep is crucial for learning and memory. One study even found that sleep-deprived people had a 40% reduction in their ability to learn new things.
Wow. That's a huge difference. And it turns out that even disrupting deep sleep without actually waking someone up can impair learning.
Yeah. So those All-night cram sessions might actually backfire.
Better to get a good night's sleep before a big test. And finally, let's talk about the connection between sleep and Alzheimer's disease.
This is a pretty concerning link that researchers are just starting to understand. It seems like the buildup of amyloid protein in the brain, a hallmark of Alzheimer's, actually messes with our deep sleep.
And this impaired sleep, in turn, makes it harder for the brain to clear out that amyloid and to consolidate memories.
Right. So disrupted deep sleep might be a key factor in the progression of Alzheimer's disease.
It's like this vicious cycle. Okay, so we've covered the brain. What about the rest of our bodies? What happens when we don't get enough sleep?
Well, the research is pretty clear on this. Insufficient sleep increases our risk for a whole host of chronic diseases.
And we're talking about some of the biggest killers out there: heart disease, obesity, diabetes, cancer.
Exactly. And these links are pretty well established now. Studies have shown that even a small amount of sleep loss can negatively affect our cardiovascular system.
Like our blood pressure and heart rate go up even if we're just missing an hour or two of sleep.
And our sympathetic nervous system, which is our stress response system, it gets stuck in overdrive.
So chronic sleep deprivation is basically putting constant stress on our bodies. And that stress can also mess with our metabolism, right?
Definitely. Sleep loss can lead to insulin resistance, which is a precursor to type 2 diabetes.
And it can also mess with our hunger hormones. We end up feeling hungrier even if we've eaten enough.
Right. And not only that, but our cravings shift towards unhealthy foods, those high-calorie, sugary, salty things.
It's like our brains are saying, give me energy now, and our willpower goes out the window.
Absolutely. And then there's the impact on the reproductive system. Sleep deprivation can mess with our hormones, especially testosterone in men.
And it can even affect fertility in both men and women.
Yeah. And of course, we can't forget about the immune system. Sleep is absolutely essential for fighting off infections.
And studies have shown that sleep-deprived people have a weaker response to vaccines.
Which means they're more likely to get sick. And getting catch-up sleep might not fully undo the damage.
That's concerning. Now, on to the really scary stuff. Cancer.
Yeah, several large studies have linked short sleep duration to an increased risk of developing various cancers.
And it seems like chronic inflammation, which can be triggered by sleep loss, might be a key factor.
Right. And there's even research suggesting that sleep deprivation can actually mess with our DNA, making us more susceptible to cancer.
It's like a cascade of negative effects. So we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about why sleep is so crucial and what happens when we don't get enough. Now, let's delve into the mysterious world of dreams. That REM sleep stage, where our brains are so active but our bodies are paralyzed.
It's definitely one of the most fascinating and perplexing aspects of sleep. And our understanding of dreaming has come a long way since the days of Freud.
Right. While his specific theories about dream interpretation aren't really backed up by science, he did get one thing right. Dreams are a product of the brain.
Exactly. And thanks to brain imaging techniques like MRI, we can actually see what's happening in the brain during REM sleep.
And what we see is that a lot of areas are lighting up, like the visual cortex, the motor cortex, the hippocampus, which is involved in memory.
And importantly, the emotional centers of the brain, like the amygdala. And these areas are often even more active during REM sleep than when we're awake.
So that supports the idea that REM sleep is crucial for processing emotions, helping us detach from the intensity of our experiences.
Right. It's like our brains are working through emotional stuff while we sleep. And there's even evidence that getting enough REM sleep can reduce our emotional reactivity to negative events.
So sleep is like overnight therapy for our brains. And REM sleep also seems to be important for fine-tuning our social skills, especially our ability to read facial expressions.
Yeah. It's like our brains are practicing social interactions during REM sleep. And studies have shown that if you're sleep deprived, you're worse at interpreting facial expressions.
And let's not forget the connection between REM sleep and creativity. It's like the brain is making those unique, unexpected connections that lead to those aha moments.
Right. The research suggests that during REM sleep, our brains are more likely to make those distant, non-obvious associations that spark creativity. And this is supported by studies showing that people who get enough REM sleep are better at solving creative problems.
It's amazing how much our brains are doing while we're seemingly unconscious. Now, the research also delves into the darker side of sleep, talking about sleep disorders, and there's a whole range of them, from sleepwalking to insomnia to narcolepsy.
Yeah. Unfortunately, sleep disorders are pretty common. They can have a huge impact on people's lives. And they highlight just how important sleep is for our overall health and well-being.
Absolutely. So let's start with parasomnias, which are basically abnormal behaviors that happen during sleep.
And sleepwalking is probably the most well-known parasomnia. Most of the time it's harmless, but there have been some rare cases where people have done some pretty crazy stuff while sleepwalking.
Yeah. The research mentions a guy who actually committed a crime while sleepwalking. But luckily, that's super rare.
And then there's insomnia, which is probably the most common sleep disorder. People with insomnia have trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or both.
And it can be really debilitating. They're tired all the time, which can affect their work, their relationships, their overall quality of life.
Right. And the causes of insomnia can be complex, but often it's related to stress, anxiety, or other psychological factors.
Now, onto narcolepsy, which is a bit different. It's characterized by excessive daytime sleepiness. Like, people just can't stay awake.
Yeah. And they can have these sudden sleep attacks that come on without warning. And then there's cataplexy, which is a sudden loss of muscle control, often triggered by strong emotions.
And sleep paralysis, which can be pretty terrifying.
Yeah. It's basically when you're aware of your surroundings but can't move or speak. And some people even feel like there's someone else in the room with them.
That's super creepy. And it turns out that narcolepsy is caused by a deficiency in a neurotransmitter called orexin, which helps regulate the sleep-wake cycle.
Right, so their brains aren't sending the right signals to stay awake.
And then there's this really rare and scary disorder called fatal familial insomnia.
Yeah. It's a genetic disease where people literally can't sleep. And sadly, it's always fatal.
It just shows how crucial sleep is for survival. We can't live without it.
Exactly. And there's even some evidence that sleep deprivation might be more deadly than food deprivation.
Seriously.
Yeah. Animal studies have shown that rats deprived of sleep die faster than rats deprived of food. And there have been a few cases of people potentially dying from extreme sleep deprivation.
That's terrifying. Now, the research also addresses this idea that some people only need 6¾ hours of sleep.
Right. There was a study on a pre-industrial tribe that seemed to support that. But the research cautions against using this as proof that we don't need 8 hours.
Because those people also had shorter lifespans, even though they were generally healthy.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that too much sleep can also be a problem.
So it's about finding that sweet spot. Enough sleep to feel rested and function well, but not too much.
Exactly. Now let's get into the 21st century sleep crisis and what we can do about it. And one of the biggest culprits is artificial light.
Right. We're surrounded by it. Our phones, our computers, our TVs, and it's messing with our natural sleep cycles.
Yeah. The blue light emitted from these devices suppresses melatonin production, which makes it harder to fall asleep.
So those late night scrolling sessions are a double whammy. They're keeping our brains active and messing with our hormones.
Absolutely. And then there's alcohol. While it might make you feel sleepy at first, it actually disrupts your sleep later on.
Yeah, especially REM sleep. And it can also impair memory consolidation.
So that nightcap might not be such a good idea after all. And then there's temperature. Did you know that your body temperature actually needs to drop to fall asleep?
Interesting. So that's why a cool room is better for sleeping.
Exactly. And our bodies naturally cool down before bed, but things like climate control and certain types of bedding can interfere with this process.
And then there are those annoying alarm clocks.
Yeah, they're a necessary evil, but they often wake us up in the middle of a sleep cycle, which can leave us feeling groggy.
Okay, now let's talk about sleeping pills. The research doesn't seem to be a fan.
No, it's pretty critical of them, actually. It says that sleeping pills don't really induce natural sleep. They're more like sedatives.
So they knock you out, but they don't give you the same restorative sleep as you'd get naturally.
Right. And there are also some concerning side effects, like an increased risk of death and even cancer.
So not exactly a long-term solution. What does the research recommend instead?
Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI. It's a type of therapy that helps people identify and change the thoughts and behaviors that are contributing to their insomnia.
So it's about addressing the root of the problem, not just masking the symptoms.
Exactly. And it's been shown to be very effective. And of course, there are also some general good sleep practices that everyone can benefit from.
Like having a consistent sleep schedule, avoiding caffeine and alcohol before bed, creating a relaxing bedtime routine.
Right. And making sure your bedroom is dark, quiet, and cool. Basic stuff, but it makes a big difference.
Definitely. The research also talks about the importance of sleep in the workplace.
Yeah, this whole idea that you have to sacrifice sleep to be successful, just not true.
In fact, sleep deprivation actually makes people less productive and more likely to make mistakes.
Right. And some companies are starting to recognize this and are implementing programs to promote better sleep habits among their employees.
Now, onto a pretty disturbing topic, sleep deprivation as torture.
Yeah. This section of the research is pretty powerful. It talks about how sleep deprivation has been used as a form of torture and how it's been recognized by courts as cruel and inhuman punishment.
Because sleep is a basic human need. We can't function without it.
Exactly. And yet it's still sometimes used in interrogations.
This marks the end of part 1 of our book discussion. If you enjoyed the content, let us know in the comments. Your feedback will help us decide when to share part 2.